Have you ever faced a moment in your life that tested the very foundations of your faith? A moment where everything you believed was called into question? The story I'm about to share is one of profound tragedy, where hope seemed distant, yet faith emerged as a guiding light in the darkest of times. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." It is a promise that resonates deeply, especially when the storms of life gather. Imagine a family, bound by love and faith, thriving in their community, drawing strength from one another and their shared beliefs. They embraced each day with gratitude, celebrating every moment as a gift. But life, as we know, can change in an instant. In the blink of an eye, tragedy struck. What began as a typical day soon spiraled into chaos, leaving them grappling with unimaginable loss and heartache. The weight of despair hung heavy in the air, testing their resolve and challenging their understanding of faith and purpose. As we journey through this narrative, we will explore the depths of their sorrow and the flickering flame of hope that remained. This is not just a story of tragedy, it is a testament to the power of faith when faced with life's harshest realities. Stay with us as we unveil this true story, a story that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering belief that even in our darkest moments, light can break through. The Thompson family lived in the small town of Cedar Hollow, a quiet and peaceful place where neighbors still waved from their porches, children rode bikes through tree-lined streets, and church bells echoed every Sunday morning. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where a kind word or a helping hand was never far away. And at the very heart of this town stood the Thompsons, a family known not only for their unwavering faith but for the deep love they poured into the lives of everyone they touched. Michael Thompson, the father, was more than a pastor. He was a shepherd in the truest sense. Tall, gentle, and steady as a rock, Michael wasn't just admired for his sermons, but for the way he lived them out daily. He believed in walking alongside people through their pain, not just preaching from the pulpit. His office was often just a bench in the town park, where he would sit for hours with anyone who needed comfort, guidance, or simply someone to listen. He was known for his calm presence, a man whose silence could be as comforting as his words. Grace, his wife, was the soul of their home. A woman of quiet strength and profound gentleness, she carried the weight of many burdens without ever letting her spirit waver. Her faith was practical, lived out in acts of kindness, meals prepared for grieving families, prayers whispered over sick children, notes of encouragement slipped into neighbors' mailboxes. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of peace that only comes from walking closely with God through both joy and sorrow. Their 3 children, Noah, Lily, and Elijah, reflected the heart of their parents. Noah, the eldest at 17, was thoughtful and wise beyond his years. He often volunteered at the church's youth nights, leading worship or helping younger kids with schoolwork. Lily, 14, had a fire in her heart, passionate, artistic, and deeply compassionate. She dreamed of becoming a missionary, often spending her weekends making care packages for the homeless with her mom. And Elijah, the youngest, was the family's joy bringer. At just 9 years old, his laughter could light up a room, and his endless curiosity kept everyone on their toes. Together, the Thompsons were more than just a family, they were a ministry in motion. Their home was a haven of love and warmth. The kitchen always smelled of fresh bread or Grace's famous apple pie, and there was rarely a night when a guest wasn't seated at their table. Whether it was a neighbor struggling with addiction, a single mother in need of support, or a runaway teenager looking for safety, the Thompsons welcomed them all, not as charity cases, but as family. Each morning began with prayer. Before school and work, the family would gather around the table, holding hands, committing their day to God. Scripture was not just read, but lived, woven into their conversations, their decisions, their dreams. And each evening ended the same way, in prayer and gratitude, no matter how hard the day had been. They were not perfect, but they were faithful. They struggled, like any family, with bills, stress, and exhaustion. But what set them apart was their unwavering belief that God was present in all things, that He was good, even in the unknown. They believed that suffering was not meaningless, that every tear held weight in the eyes of their Creator. To Cedar Hollow, the Thompsons represented a kind of spiritual anchor. When tragedy hit the town, a fatal car crash, a fire, a young girl diagnosed with leukemia, it was the Thompsons who showed up first and left last. They didn't just pray from a distance. They sat in the ashes with the broken-hearted. They knew the language of lament, but they also carried the torch of hope. But as Scripture reminds us, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. And in a twist that no one could have foreseen, The very family who had been a source of strength for so many would soon find themselves in need of that same strength, perhaps more than they had ever imagined. This is the story of how their world was shaken. How faith, so deeply rooted, was tested in ways that would leave scars. And yet, it is also the story of how God, even in the silence, was never absent. It was a Sunday like any other. The morning sun spilled golden light over Cedar Hollow, bathing the town in peace. Birds sang as the Thompsons got ready for church, Michael reviewing his sermon notes, Grace packing snacks for the after-service fellowship, the children dressing in their Sunday best. They had no idea that within hours, their lives would fracture in ways they could never have prepared for. That afternoon after church, the family decided to take a drive to visit Grace's parents who lived just outside town. It was a simple, familiar route they'd taken countless times before, winding through wooded hills, past farmlands and creeks, with worship music softly playing through the car's speakers. Laughter filled the van as Elijah told one of his silly jokes, the kind that made everyone groan and giggle at the same time. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A speeding truck, driven by a man under the influence, veered into their lane on a blind curve. There was no time to swerve, no chance to react. The impact was instant, the sound of metal crumpling, glass shattering, tires screeching, followed by a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow time itself. When first responders arrived on the scene, what they found was devastating. Grace was pronounced dead at the scene, her body shielding Elijah, whose small frame had been spared serious injury only by his mother's final act of love. Lily, unconscious and bleeding heavily, was airlifted to the nearest trauma center. Michael, pinned behind the wheel, was in critical condition. Noah had suffered multiple fractures and a severe head injury. Elijah, conscious but in shock, sat silently, clinging to his mother's Bible, found beside him on the floor of the van. Word spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. The family that had prayed over others in times of crisis was now the one in need of desperate prayer. The entire town gathered at the church that evening, tearfully interceding on their behalf, lighting candles, and clinging to hope. Doctors fought tirelessly through the night. Michael survived emergency surgery but was left with a fractured spine and broken ribs. Noah remained in a coma. Lily's condition was touch and go, and Elijah, though physically unharmed, stopped speaking altogether. The trauma had silenced his joyful spirit. In a matter of moments, everything that had once felt secure had been swept away, replaced with hospital rooms, whispered updates, machines, and mourning. Michael awoke days later to the news that would tear through his soul. Grace was gone. The love of his life, his partner in ministry, his anchor gone. And his children were hanging in the balance. He wept until there were no more tears, clutching the cross necklace she always wore, now tangled in his trembling hands. Why? How could this happen to them? To her? Questions without answers. Pain without relief. A storm of grief that seemed impossible to survive. The man responsible for the crash survived with only minor injuries. He was arrested at the scene, drunk, belligerent, unaware of the lives he had shattered. For the Thompsons, justice offered no comfort. No sentence could undo what had been lost. No court ruling could resurrect what was now buried in memory. Days turned into weeks. Michael, confined to a wheelchair, was discharged from the hospital. Noah remained unconscious. Lily slowly began to recover, though haunted by survivors' guilt and physical pain. And Elijah. Elijah still hadn't spoken a single word. Their home, once filled with laughter and song, now echoed with a haunting silence. Photographs of Grace remained on the walls, reminders of love, now laced with sorrow. Faith, once so effortless, now felt like a daily battle. Michael wrestled in prayer, sometimes in silence, sometimes in rage. He opened his Bible only to find the words blurred by tears. But deep beneath the grief, a flicker of hope refused to be extinguished. This was their valley of the shadow. And though they walked through it, they were not alone. In the wake of tragedy, faith can often feel like a distant echo, familiar, but unreachable. For the Thompsons, who had once been pillars of spiritual strength in their community, the accident did more than break bones and take lives. It fractured their very understanding of God, of prayer, of purpose. Michael Thompson, once the steady shepherd of Cedar Hollow, found himself spiritually adrift. He had stood behind the pulpit hundreds of times declaring the goodness of God, but now in the silence of his living room where Grace's chair sat empty, those declarations returned like questions. His days were slow, filled with pain, physical and emotional. Every movement reminded him of his limitations. But nothing hurt more than waking up each morning without the warmth of his wife beside him. He struggled to pray. The words wouldn't come. When he opened his Bible, he didn't feel inspired, he felt betrayed. "How could you allow this, God?" he whispered more than once in the stillness of dawn. He wrestled with guilt, wondering if he had missed a divine warning, if he had failed to pray enough, believe enough, protect enough. For weeks, he couldn't bring himself to return to church. The thought of standing before the congregation, the same people he had comforted so many times before, now seeing him broken and grieving, it was too much. But deeper than the shame was a question that cut to his soul. If I can't lead with joy, can I still lead with pain? One morning, while sitting alone in his study, he found a journal Grace had kept tucked away on a shelf. Inside, her handwriting traced prayers and praises, fears and reflections. On one page, she had written, "Even if everything falls apart, even if the worst happens, I still choose to believe. Because my hope isn't in outcomes, it's in Him." That line stayed with Michael. For the first time in weeks, he fell to his knees, not with perfect words, but with open hands. And in that moment, he didn't feel peace, not yet, but he did feel presence. The quiet, unshakable presence of the God who promises never to leave, even in the fire. Lily's struggle was different, but no less painful. As a young teenager, the loss of her mother shook her identity to the core. Grace had been her confidant, her spiritual mentor, her best friend. Lily couldn't understand why God would allow someone so good, so faithful, to be taken. She blamed herself. She had survived the crash. But for what? Her dreams felt small now, her prayers muted. She stopped attending youth group. Stopped singing. Her once colorful journals were now blank. But every night, she held her mother's devotional in her hands, even if she couldn't bring herself to open it. One night, after tossing and turning, she did. The page that greeted her read, "There will be days when all you can do is breathe. That is still worship. He sees you." She broke down, sobbing into the pages. For the first time since the funeral, she let herself feel, not just the pain, but the presence of the one who understood it. She started writing again, not pretty songs, but honest laments. She wrote letters to God full of questions, anger, grief, and eventually surrender. One of her first entries simply said, "I don't know how to keep believing, but I want to." That became her prayer. Noah, still in a coma, became the quiet center of the family's struggle. Every day, Michael or Lily would sit beside him, reading scripture aloud, playing worship music, telling him stories of their childhood. There was no promise he would wake up, but there was hope. And in that hope, they found strength. It was in those long quiet hours beside his hospital bed that Michael rediscovered the value of simply being still before God. Even the nurses began to comment on the peace that seemed to follow the Thompsons into Noah's room. One of them, a young woman named Rachel, later shared that it was the first time she had ever seen a family minister from their grief. And then there was Elijah. 9 years old. Silent. Withdrawn. He had seen too much. Lost too much. He stopped smiling. Stopped playing. He would sit for hours staring out the window, clutching his mother's Bible. Therapists tried to engage him. Family tried to distract him. But his little heart carried a weight that words couldn't unlock. Until one evening, as Lily played piano softly in the background, a song their mom used to hum while cooking, Elijah walked over, placed the Bible on the piano, and whispered, "Can you play her favorite one?" That moment broke something open. Slowly, Elijah began to speak again, not all at once, but little by little. He began to ask questions about heaven. He began to pray short, childlike prayers at night. He even asked to go back to church, saying, "I want to sit where Mommy used to sit." His healing reminded the family that sometimes the smallest faith is the strongest, not because it has all the answers, but because it simply trusts. As a family, the Thompsons began rebuilding. They began attending church again. Not to serve, not yet, but just to sit. To receive. To be held. The congregation, many of whom had once looked to them for strength, now became their strength. Meals were delivered. Bills were covered. Prayers were constant. And through it all, the Thompsons learned something new about faith. It wasn't about appearances or perfect theology. It wasn't about loud prayers or eloquent sermons. Real faith, they discovered, is forged in fire. It's found in the whispered prayers, the trembling hands, the quiet resolve to get out of bed and face another day. It's choosing to worship with tears in your eyes. It's sitting in a pew when your heart is breaking. It's opening the Bible not for answers, but for presence. They learned that God is not just in the mountaintops, He is especially in the valleys. He's in the hospital room, the graveside, the tear-streaked prayers of a father, the journal entries of a grieving girl, the silence of a broken-hearted boy. And slowly, their faith didn't just return, it deepened. It matured. It shifted from something they had inherited to something they had fought for. And though the pain never fully left, they began to see the beauty even in the ashes. Time didn't erase the pain the Thompsons carried, it reshaped it. 2 years after the accident, life for the family looked vastly different. Grace's absence was still felt in every corner of their home, like a quiet echo in the halls. But what once was a gaping wound had slowly become a sacred scar. Tender, yes, but also a reminder of love, resilience, and divine faithfulness in the darkest valley. Michael eventually returned to the pulpit. Not as the same man he once was, but as a deeper, more broken, more authentic version of himself. His sermons no longer came from a place of certainty, but from a place of experience. The kind of experience that can only be birthed in suffering. He began preaching more about lament, about holding on when you don't understand, about finding God not just in deliverance, but in the waiting, in the weeping. His words weren't polished, but they were powerful, because they were real. And his congregation, many of whom had suffered silently through their own tragedies, responded. They didn't want perfection. They wanted honesty. And that's what Michael now offered. He started a weekly support group called Faith Through the Fire, where others could share their pain, ask questions, and simply be heard. No easy answers. No religious cliches. Just space to feel and to heal. Lily, now 15, had grown into a quiet, thoughtful young woman. Her faith wasn't loud, but it was unwavering. She continued writing letters to her mom, but she also began journaling her walk with God, how grief and grace walked hand in hand. She returned to music, this time writing original songs, raw poetic pieces that spoke of loss, healing, and hope. One of her songs, titled Still I Will Praise You, went viral online after a friend posted a video of her singing it at church. Messages poured in from strangers, teens who had lost parents, people battling depression, others who had questioned God and felt alone, all saying the same thing, this gave me hope. Noah, against all odds, woke from his coma 47 days after the accident. His recovery was long and difficult, filled with therapy, surgeries, and emotional healing. But each step forward felt like a miracle. The day he walked into church on his own 2 feet, the congregation stood in stunned silence, and then erupted into praise. He still bore physical scars, but his spirit was steady. Quiet and contemplative, Noah didn't talk much about the crash, but he often said this. I don't remember the accident, but I remember peace, like I wasn't alone. Elijah, the youngest, had come to understand grief in a way most children never do. But his simple faith carried profound strength. He started drawing pictures again, scenes of heaven, of Jesus holding his mom, of their family surrounded by light. His drawings decorated the house, each one a silent sermon on hope. And while the Thompsons would never call their story complete, they had learned to see God not only in the good, but in the grief. Not because the pain had vanished, but because something stronger had taken root. Trust. They didn't get the answers they once begged for. But they got something better, the assurance that God was with them. Every step, every tear, every dark night. Their tragedy didn't define them, their response to it did. They lived differently now. Slower. More intentionally. More grateful. Sunday dinners were sacred again, not because everyone was present, but because their presence had become more meaningful. Every meal, every laugh, every prayer was cherished. Grace's chair remained empty, but never forgotten. They left it there, not out of denial, but out of reverence. Her Bible sat on the mantel, open to Romans 8 verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. And they did. They still loved Him. Not because their lives were perfect, but because, even in the imperfection, they saw His hand. Perhaps you've walked through a valley of your own. Or maybe, you're in one right now. Maybe you've lost someone, faced unanswered prayers, or carried a silent pain no one around you could truly understand. If that's you, please hear this. The Thompson story is not just theirs, it's yours too. A story that reminds us. It's okay to question God. He is big enough to hold our doubts. A healing is not always fast, but it is always possible. Scars can become testimonies, if we let God write our story. So, take heart. In your pain, He is near. In your questions, He listens. And in your tragedy, He is still writing something beautiful. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment so heavy it felt like your faith was slipping through your fingers? Maybe you've walked through grief, loss, or a silent struggle that no one truly saw. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own journey of wrestling with faith in the middle of tragedy, we want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. Your testimony might be the encouragement someone else needs today. This isn't just a video, it's a community. A place of healing, hope, and faith. Let's walk this road together. If you're in a place where words fail but your heart is crying out, type "Still I will praise you" in the comments, as a declaration of faith, even in the midst of your pain. And if you know someone who's hurting, someone questioning God or walking through grief, send this video to them. Be a light in their darkness. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of tragedy, resilience, and unwavering faith. Each week, we share real journeys that remind us, even when everything else falls apart, God never does. Tragedy may change the course of our lives, but it doesn't have to destroy our faith. The pain is real. The questions are many, but so is the presence of God. He doesn't promise to shield us from every storm, but He does promise to walk with us through them. Step by step, tear by tear. Isaiah 43 verse 2 reminds us, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." This isn't just a story about loss. It's a story about presence, the presence of God in the middle of life's most heartbreaking chapters. So whether you're mourning, questioning, or quietly holding on, you are not forgotten. There is purpose in your pain. There is still beauty in your brokenness. Until next time, stay rooted in faith, remain open to healing, and never be afraid to tell your story. Because your testimony, no matter how messy, might be the light someone else needs to find their way. God bless you, and remember, even in tragedy, truth and grace still remain.